Since 1887, the Stonington Free Library has been a center for knowledge, ideas, creativity, and entertainment. It is a comfortable and welcoming community space for the town of Stonington, Connecticut, where all ages can explore, discover, gather, and learn within a building of distinctive and unique architecture. This video program is an evolution to expand the offerings of the library to share directly in your home or organization. Welcome to the Thoughtful Thursdays speaker series, made available to you by the Stonington Free Library.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Michaela Hall. I am the director of the library. I want to thank you all for being here today and give special thanks to Joanna Scott and James Longenbach for presenting this program and for all the work that they have put into it, as well as the James Merrill House for co-sponsoring this event. Lastly, thank you to the rest of our staff and volunteers for organizing this program. We ask, as I've been saying, which you'll probably get sick of, please keep your cameras off and your microphones muted unless asked by myself to turn them on, and this will just minimize any disruption. If you have any questions throughout the program, please type them in the chat. Questions will be answered when we open up Q&A at the end. I am recording the program. All personal information, such as names of participants, will be edited out before it is uploaded to our YouTube channel. And we are using live transcript tonight. It is available. It's like closed captions. So if you're interested and would find that helpful, there is an enable option that should appear on your screen and you can turn it on. I now turn it over to our Director Emeritus, Belinda Decay, to introduce James and Joanna. Go ahead, Belinda.
It is such a pleasure to be able to welcome James Longenbach and Joanna Scott to this program. I do thank Michaela Hall and Carla Umland for all the work that they put in to make these programs possible. They run so smoothly. I'm so grateful for that. But tonight we do welcome our two very distinguished guests who are well known to a wide audience across the country, as well as being friends and neighbors in this community. James Longenbach and Joanna Scott are, yes, a team, and yes, husband and wife, and yet so very much each is distinguished in their own field and in their own right. 2 years ago, they were fellows in the Merrill House Writers in Residence program and gave a joint reading here in the library. And to our great good fortune, they came and they stayed. And I just want to say this is just one of the many instances of the way in which the Merrill House enriches this community. James Longenbach is the Joseph Henry Gilmore Professor of English at the University of Rochester and is the author of 6 books of poems. His latest, Forever, just published by W.W. Norton, and 8 books of literary criticism. His poetry and most, if not all, his books of criticism are available here in the library, I'm very proud to say. His mastery of the lyric and the subjects, both wide-ranging in allusion and in their intense intimacy, make these finely crafted poems a joy to read. While his criticism is an unusual melding of scholarship informed by passion for his subject, combined with the true teacher's ability to share with student and general reader alike. Joanna Scott is a MacArthur Award recipient, a Pulitzer finalist, a Guggenheim Fellow, among many awards and fellowships. She is the author of 12 works of fiction. Her latest collection of stories, Excuse Me While I Disappear, was published to great acclaim this spring by Little Brown. She also teaches at the University of Rochester, where she is the Roswell Smith Burroughs Professor of English. The recently published Conversations with Joanna Scott, which are again here in the library, is a generously revealing window on an artist's craft and thought. But reading her new book, I came across this in the first story, and I think her protagonist, the homeless wanderer, Guy Fraser, speaks for her work, and really for James's also. It is never enough, he says, to experience the magnificence of a beautiful thing that has been lovingly made. We must share the experience. We must cry out with joy, sound the bell, invite our friends to see what we saw and what we felt. Delight matters little until it has been communicated. And that's from the first story in Joanna's book. So how grateful we are that James Longenbach and Joanna Scott are here with us to share their delight with us. And just one quick note, in your email, there is a link to Bank Square Books to enable you to purchase Jim and Joanna's new books. And we have partnered with Bank Square on our programs for many years. So thank you, James and Joanna, and I'll hand over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Belinda, for those lovely introductions. They were very moving, and you absolutely caught the my maybe coded message in that book. You know, at this point in my life, I feel very strongly that the pleasure we take in art is something to share. It's a gift that's given to us, and we can then give it to others. So thank you, and thank you to the Stonington community. We arrived here, and then we just couldn't leave. So, what do you want to say? Hello, Joe.
Oh, is it my turn? Let me echo Joanna and just say thank you to everyone, especially to Belinda and to Carla and to Michaela. Should I start, Joanna?
And to thanks to the James Merrill House for co-sponsoring, to the whole library community. It's wonderful to be Zooming from here.
That's what I meant by everyone.
Yeah, everyone. Michaela and Carla, thank you guys. Okay, yeah. Let me just say that Jim and I first read each other's work in an apartment in Rome in the winter of 1981. And I have it in actually an old journal. I was, 20 years old, and I had just met Jim on a study abroad program, and we discovered that we both cared a lot about writing and literature, and we were both kind of secretly writing ourselves. Jim was writing poetry, and I was trying to write stories. And one day we shared each other's work. I gave you a story, and you gave me some poems, and we sat on the floor and we read them.
I read, so the story you gave me was Giovanna's Secret.
Yeah, well, good for you too. And I remember a line in your story, in your poem, about a girl who had green eyes and a hood to hide them. And I thought, I wonder who that is.
It was the first pentameter I ever wrote. She has green eyes and wears a hood that hides them.
Anyway, that was the beginning. And it's, among many things in our lives, we've been able to share deeply our work and move through drafts with each other, and that's not always easy. We need to trust each other to point out things that aren't working, and I think we do that. We really like it when the other half of us comes up with a better idea than we had.
Or often just reading it or having you read it. Mm-hmm. I'll know instantly that something is wrong, and I'll know instantly what I have to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's right. When we read aloud our work aloud, an early draft aloud. Absolutely. Yeah, so we're going to alternate.
We'll go back and forth.
Kind of, anthologies tend to alternate between magazines, alternate.
She said the Latin alternate, and I said the German back and forth.
Yeah. I don't know. Okay.
So should I start?
Sure.
Okay. As Belinda mentioned, we were first in Stonington in the Merrill House as fellows, and we loved it there. And we especially loved there his library, because there in those books was frozen our youth. The library really ends around 1985. And, I remember our first day there and saying, look at all those Donald Finkel books. Look at all those John Barth books. And we read them long ago, but they were all there and alive. And that was very moving. So I want to begin by reading this poem. It's a sequence. It's in 6 parts, but the parts are quite short. And it's about living in that apartment and living in the borough of Stonington. And the 5th part, I'm sorry, is just a sequence of titles that were in James Merrill's library, all of them poetry books. And it was really the section that I spent the longest on. They're merely in alphabetical order, but to choose them and to have that arrangement work was very challenging and also very beautiful. The poem is called after the great story by Elizabeth Bishop that was then applied to Stonington, In the Village. And it is in 6 brief parts, as I mentioned. In the Village. 1. Shortly before I died, or possibly after, I moved to a small village by the sea. You'll recognize it, as I did, because I've written about this village before. The rocky sliver of land, the little houses where the fishermen once lived. We had everything we needed. A couple of rooms overlooking the harbor, a small collection of books, paperbacks, the pages brittle with age. How, if I've never seen the village, had I pictured it so accurately? How did I know we'd be happy there? Happier than ever before. The books reminded me of what in our youth we called literature. 2. The sentences I've just written took it out of me. I searched for the words and I resisted them as soon as I put them down. Now, listening to them again, what I hear is not so much nostalgia as a love of beginning, a wish not to be removed from time, but always to be immersed in it. The boats come in, the boats go out. 3. After a routine ultrasound revealed a 15-centimeter mass, my left kidney was removed robotically on February 12th. 15 months later, nodules were discovered in my lungs and peritoneum. 2 subsequent rounds of therapy failed to impede their growth, so I enrolled in a trial, a treatment not yet FTA approved. I walked down High Street to the harbor, though when I say walked, I mean imagined. I hadn't been there yet. 4. Of ghosts pursued, forgotten, sought anew. Everywhere I go, the trees are full of them. From trees come books that, when they open, lead you to expect a person on the other side. One hand having pulled the doorknob toward him, the other held out, open, beckoning you forward. 5. The branch will not break. A cold spring. Leaflets. The lost world. The moving target. Nightmare begins responsibility. Rivers and mountains. The story of our lives. Untitled subjects. Water Street. 6. Ash blonde, tall, a sweater knotted by its sleeves around his neck. A boy is leaning on a bicycle. Deftly, when she reaches him, a girl slips to the grass, one hand straightening her skirt, the other tugging at the boy, who remains standing to sit beside her. Their heads are close enough to be touching. Their lips are still. A book is the future. You dream of reading it. And once you've finished, it's a miracle. You know the past. The sky fills with stars. The sun climbs every morning over Watch Hill, dropping behind the harbor at dusk. Water Street runs past church and wall, harmony and school, until it crosses Omega by the sea. Good.
Thank you. This in Jim's poem, among its many explorations and emotions and inquiries, you can hear attention to the importance of books that need to save stories. You have that wonderful line about the book is the future, but it's a miracle. We learn about, we know the past through it. I did notice when the poster for this reading came out, that when you put our books together in a certain order, you get, excuse me while I disappear forever. No, we're not going to do that. The original title of, or not the original, the working title of this book of stories was actually Unreadable. I mean, the title was Unreadable because I was writing about unreadable stories. I was writing about stories that had been lost, books that had been destroyed, books that had never been written, stories that had never been told, stories that weren't believed. I thought the title Unreadable would work. The publisher didn't like that, I guess, but they urged me to change it. I always thought that you call a book, by calling the book Unreadable, if then someone said, your book's unreadable, I would say, absolutely, it is. It's unreadable. The stories, there are different forms, long stories, short stories, stories in fragments, very short stories with lots of different points of view. For this reading, I will read start with read two of the very short stories. Start with one that is titled Thank Ye, Jim Bridger. And it is about the explorer who crossed Yellowstone in the 19th century and was also a teller of yarns. And this is imagining one of his yarns. Thank Ye, Jim Bridger. The fur trapper emerges from the shade of the pine forest into the open bowl of a valley. He hasn't eaten since dinner last night, and he is glad to anticipate his next meal among the herd of bison grazing in the meadow. Later, he will claim that the bison were as tame as cattle when he walked among them, that he came so close he could hear their teeth ripping the grass, that one sweet calf even let him run his hand over the blonde fur on its back. Only when he cocks his rifle does the herd take notice, and then the stampede that follows seems to progress in a languorous, nearly soundless fashion, reminding Jim Bridger of pictures in a zoetrope that is being turned too slowly. He takes aim and fires. A young bull buckles instantly, diving horns first into the grass. The rest of the herd continue their lazy retreat, leaving Bridger to his kill. He makes camp on the bank beside a shallow, twisting thread of water he names Tangled Creek in his mind. He builds a fire, spears the tenderloin he carved from the animal and turns it patiently in the flame, giving it a good black crust. To warn away wolves and grizzlies that are sure to be drawn to the carcass, he keeps his fire burning through the night. He rests contentedly, drifting with the clouds in and out of sleep. By morning, buzzards are circling overhead and the eyes of the bison are thick with flies. Bridger douses his fire, straps on his pack, shoulders his rifle, and sets off in a northeasterly direction. He follows Tangled Creek for 2 days, turning this way and that. The grasslands give way to sagebrush, the sagebrush to fir trees that grow 100 feet high and cover the earth in a layer of soft needles. Along the slopes of the foothills in the distance, the forest is interrupted by bald patches of limestone. Soon the creek disappears beneath the rocky ground. The stench of sulfur in the air grows stronger. Natural limestone cones wrapped in velvety moss at their base, striated with yellow and tipped in crimson, look as if they'd been molded by human hands. From the distance, a strange rattling sound can be heard. Bridger is reminded distinctly of wagon wheels turning along a gravel trail. Though of course, there are neither wagons nor trails for hundreds of miles. As he draws closer to the sound, the rotten stench intensifies. Empty craters pock the earth. The air becomes hot and misty, and Bridger feels a rumbling sensation beneath his feet. Being by nature a man who always has to see what is around the next corner, no matter the peril involved, he presses forward between the limestone formations. He finds himself supported by a rim of rock as thin and transparent as ice. A cloud of hot steam spews from a crevice in the basalt wall. Is this the entrance to the underworld? Even Jim Bridger knows better than to try to find out. He decides to call the hot spring Hell's Broth, a name that is destined to be replaced, since Jim Bridger, being illiterate, never writes it down. With so many natural wonders to discover, how can a lone explorer keep track of them all? He has a good, reliable map in his mind, and so will be able to guide future visitors, but that is of secondary importance. His primary motive is to see what has never been seen before. And since he can't go to the moon, he is drawn to this unexplored corner of the Western wilderness where not even the indigenous tribes dare to go. It is his first time in the corner of the wilderness that we will come to call Yellowstone. He has been traveling alone for 2 months by now. It will take him another 10 days to cross the hills and ascend the ridge that bounds the valley on the north. He has left the herds of bison far behind. He survives on trout he catches by hook and line and a rabbit he nearly steps on in a clump of wheatgrass. He tracks a mule deer to the shore of a small lake, but loses it when a strong whirlwind blows dust into his eyes. The deer runs off, zigzagging down the precipitous slope before Bridger can shoot. He camps near the lake, which he names Lake of the Wind. Despite his empty stomach, he sleeps deeply. When he wakes the next morning, the water is covered with a thin layer of wrinkled ice and a feathery snow is falling. Bridger understands that he's running out of time. He has to reach the mining camp at Cook City before the snow makes the terrain impassable. Still, he relishes the mix of fresh coolness and the warm currents of sunshine that break through the clouds. He walks briskly, humming the tune of a song whose words he's forgotten, but that still makes him feel cheerful. Distracted by the sound of his own voice, he fails to pay attention to his surroundings and does not notice how the landscape is changing until the song has ended. He looks around him. The rock formations have darkened from a sandy brown to a smooth black that sparkles in the sunlight. Ahead, within the short distance of a stone's throw, stands a magnificent elk. The elk holds its head so high, its antlers threaten to poke holes in the blue dome of the sky. The animal stares straight at Bridger, unafraid. Bridger takes aim and fires. The shot and its ricochet echo in the silence. The animal does not move. Bridger looks around instinctually to make sure no one is present to laugh at him for his poor aim. He is glad that his reputation for expert marksmanship will remain unsullied. He fires again, but again the bullet goes astray. How can it be? The elk stands unperturbed even when Bridger moves toward it. One step further and Bridger will be close enough to reach out and grab the animal by an antler, and might have done so if his fist hadn't banged hard into a translucent wall. He runs his fingers over the surface. The barrier, as high as a 4-story building, has the texture of obsidian, but the transparency of glass. Either it is some sort of immense igneous protrusion that crystallized eons ago, or the air itself has congealed and hardened. Jim Bridger stares in wonder at the wall. He walks in a daze, dragging his hand along the glassy surface until he finds a break that forms a narrow archway. He tells himself that if Hell's Broth was the entrance to the underworld, here is surely heaven's door left open for his convenience. He slips through, leaving reality behind. On the other side, he knows immediately that he must change the way he thinks in order to make sense of something that has no precedent. His capacity for disbelief is as suspended as the motionless cascade that spills like sculpted ice from a precipice into a river that does not flow. Stalks of oatgrass do not waver in the wind. Violet capsules of larkspur remain half open, stopped in mid-bloom. 2 bear cubs are caught in the midst of their playful wrestle for all eternity. A raven overhead hovers with its wings spread, held in midair in motionless flight. The elk Jim Bridger tried to shoot stands as still as a stuffed trophy. Across the valley, between the wall and the opposite ridge, nothing moves, nothing breathes, yet nothing has decayed. The sun and moon shine simultaneously with petrified light. Did this really happen? Does this place exist? I'm not sure. During the many expeditions he went on to lead across Yellowstone, Jim Bridger liked to tell the kinds of stories that no one believed. Still, he went on telling. He couldn't help himself, and the hunters and map makers and thrill seekers sitting around campfires went on listening. I'm guessing that Bridger added some embellishments with each retelling. My hunch is that he lost track of the difference between what had actually happened and what he'd made up for fun. His friends labeled him a teller of yarns. His critics called him a liar. It was understood that any newspaper editor who printed Bridger's far-fetched tales would be laughed out of town. When one impatient woman asked him why he insisted on saying things that weren't true, he replied, "There's no harm in fooling people who pump me for stories and don't even say thank ye." Do you blame him? What if you were alone in the uncharted wilderness and you found yourself in the same place where Jim Bridger arrived that September day in 1830? What if you passed through an opening in a glass wall and arrived in a corner of the world where time had stopped? Would you wonder, as Bridger did, if you were hallucinating and then conclude, as he did, that you were very much alert? Would you then decide, as the awestruck Jim Bridger did, that the valley you stumbled into was not meant for mortal eyes and so must stay hidden from the rest of humanity? Would you go on to tell everyone you meet about this sacred place and yet refuse to reveal its actual location, bypassing it with wide detours on your subsequent journeys across Yellowstone? If you saw what Bridger saw that day, and if you later were asked to describe what you saw, would you care whether or not the story you ended up telling was perceived as the truth?
I love that story. Does this place really exist? Did this really happen? In a way, every single poem or story asks those questions. This is why a poem or story, as you're reading it, and as I tell my students in a zillion different ways, has to feel like something is happening right then, or else why bother? It could be about the past, could be about the future. Who cares? It has to feel like it's happening right now. Otherwise, no one will ever read it again. And we do read it again. Over the years, Joanna and I have lived a lot of places, including this wonderful borough of Stonington. And I remember when you first read me that story in the Merrill apartment.
Right. Yeah.
But we've also been lucky enough to live for several years in Italy. We lived for 2 years in the city of Florence with our 2 daughters. And we also lived in Venice, which we love. And we love it right now. And everything you read about it in the New York Times is stupid.
He didn't say that.
Oh, you can't, Belinda, can you say stupid in the library? So this poem, which is all one throw, a couple of pages long in 5-line stanzas, is about Venice and also about the persnickety 19th century poet Matthew Arnold, whom I love. But he is persnickety. So it will begin with him and it will end with an experience in Venice. And it's called Barcarolle, which is itself a Venetian term for a little boat, a barca. Barcarolle. Empedocles on Etna is a poem by the Victorian poet Matthew Arnold. Readily, I'll concede that poetry is a criticism of life, his phrase, about as much as red-hot iron is a criticism of fire. But we're in Sicily. The gods are still with us. The sun has warmed the rocks on which we're lounging, eating goat cheese, drinking new wine. You're hardly wearing any clothes. Nobody's wearing clothes. Neither is anyone worried about sunlight. This is before Jesus, before Socrates, before the double onslaught of guilt and rationality doomed us, I'm paraphrasing Nietzsche, to believe in the rectification of the world through knowledge, to live within the limited circle of soluble problems where we may cheerfully say to life, I want you, you're worth knowing. Empedocles is having a bad day. Once he was a god, smart, good looking too. You understand how anyone might feel that way, just being where we are, tasting things, just breathing the air. Above us, Etna's cone, excuse me, Etna's cone emits its languorous white plume. Miracles? Mistrust them, says Empedocles. Mind is a spell that governs heaven and earth. Is it so small a thing to have enjoyed the sun, to have lived lightly in the spring, to have loved, to have thought, to have done? Obvious as the answer to this question may be, Empedocles climbs beyond the ashen trees, the potholes red as an open wound, and steps into a cloud. This poem of passive suffering, said Arnold, could have no place in his collected poems. No place. His greatest poem, whose suffering isn't passive. What else could suffering be? One night in Venice, I couldn't sleep. I heard the bells of San Giacomo ring 4 times, then 5. I heard the mutter of a boat, 2 voices, a woman's and a man's, and then somehow rising between them, as from the water itself, the Chopin barcarolle. Who could they have been? Why were they playing Chopin in their little boat, playing it softly, just for me? Remember when we lived like forest creatures, you and I, when all we left behind were footprints crushed in the wet grass. When I opened my eyes, sun-stirred water played across the ceiling. You were asleep. It felt like being in the present, being alive.
That I'm reminded of for years. We still do it a little bit, not as much as we used to though, but when, especially traveling, we would, just something would catch our eye and one of us would turn to the other and say, there's a poem in that. and with Jim's poem, I can tell you that it began with him. He was up before me early one morning in Venice, and I came in to make my coffee to the kitchen, and he came in from the balcony in the apartment we were staying in, and he said, "You won't believe what happened earlier." And it was that he had seen people very gracefully, quietly go by in that boat with the Chopin playing. So I'm going to read a short piece now called Somewhere in Germantown, that Jim has that line in the poem, Empedocles is having a bad day. This is sort of like Empedocles having a bad day. Some of you who know me out there might not be surprised that I really like to pretend to be a good-hearted drunk. So here you go. This is here's my good-hearted drunk who this I should say is the story was written in response to a painting by the painter Stuart Chills that is of a scene in Germantown, the Germantown neighborhood of Philadelphia, somewhere in Germantown. It was just me enjoying a bottle of beer. I wasn't making any trouble. Me and my brother's Panama shirt, my old Byers Picks black sneakers, my stepson's Billy's drawstring shorts, because we're the same height, even if we don't got the same width. And in my bottle, choice hops and water brewed to perfection. I was just walking along, going nowhere after Maggie told me, "Get out of my sight, loser. I never want to see you again." Like I got the Billy Penn curse. So it's just me with my bottle of beer, walking along. Anyway, I'm crossing Vernon Park and I can't remember if I turned right or left on Green Street and then I'm on some street I don't recognize. I'm thinking about Maggie the whole way. I got a plan for what to say to her now if I could just find my way back home. But I can't even tell if I'm heading east or west. And the neighborhood, you know its reputation. Just last week, they found a body tied up in a tarp in the woods off Magnolia Street. TV News says the police suspect foul play. Sure, they find a dead body tied up in the woods and the police think just maybe something stinks. Go figure. Good thing I got my bottle of beer. Then I see this guy. He looks okay. So I cross the street to talk to him. First, I think he's doing some surveying. Then I see he's got a paintbrush in his hand. I forget to ask him where's Wayne Avenue because I see him staring at the other side of the street. What did I miss when I was over there? I take a sip of beer and look in the direction he's looking. All I see is a building and some more buildings. I give a juicy burp to let him know I'm there. What you painting, I ask. Those buildings, he says. Buildings are buildings, I say. Don't look like much goes on there. Then I think maybe he's making an ad for some kingpin flipping real estate. He goes on painting. You just starting that picture, I ask him. It's mostly just shapes, not filled in yet, and one window and a lot of sky. But you know what he tells me? He tells me he's almost finished. You're missing a door here, I say, touching the canvas to indicate where it goes. Please don't, he says. I've ticked him off, but it's not more than a little smudge I've left. Nothing worse than a smushed flea. I watch him for a while. He's missing 3/4 of what's there, and he's already starting to screw the caps back on his tubes of paint. I'm bugged, you know, when a job is left incomplete. What about all those steps and the billboards? And he couldn't care less. Maybe he's just bored. That gives me an idea. How about painting me? I say. Come on, what is more interesting, a couple company buildings or me? I get my picture painted, Maggie will be impressed. I don't tell him that. I tell him I got a face makes the ladies swoon. Now I'm having fun hassling him. Paint me from the neck up, how about, I suggest. He's putting away his brushes. Wait, I say. I let a UPS truck go past. Then I jog across the street and stand in front of the buildings. Now you get a 2-for-1, me and your dumb buildings together, I call to him. You want to paint me in the nude? I say, that's fine. I take off my shorts and my Panama shirt. I'm down to my boxers. I can see he's looking at me. He's got a brush back in his hand. There's more, I call, as I step out of my boxers. All I got on is my sneakers. I take a swig of beer. Here's a sight deserves to be immortalized. I'm on a roll. God, the beer tastes good. I want to live forever. I do a little dance until it comes to me that I'm not making it any easier for him swishing around like this. So I stand still, not counting when I need to quench my thirst. There I am, modeling in my birthday suit, when an officer of the law comes driving by. He's probably the same cop that was scratching his head when he found that body tied up and left to rot. He writes a ticket for public drunkenness and tells me to put on my clothes. I hand him my bottle of beer so I can pull up my boxers and shorts. When I'm all dressed, I ask for my beer back. And you know what he does? He turns that bottle upside down and pours out what's left right in front of me. Glug, glug, glug. Only then does he give me the bottle back, the fucker. I can hear him breaking up laughing as he drives away. The painter has been watching the whole scene. I go back across the street with my empty bottle and take in his picture top to bottom, side to side. All he added since the last time I looked is blue, where there used to be white inside the window. That's it. Blue nothing. I went full throttle and now I'm nowhere to be seen. Like I'm so forgettable, I'm not even worth the record of my existence. A nobody. But I keep looking and I start thinking that the blue in the window is not just any blue. It's a blue so different from the blue of the sky that it's hardly blue at all. How can I even tell it's blue if I never saw that same color blue before? I just know. It is bluer than blue, no denying. It's a real special blue, and it wouldn't be there without me. Good thing I got taste and can see. I'm just what the picture needed to be perfect.
That's true, you know. You know, I've read that story probably a dozen times, but I've really never heard that one line he says, that one sentence he says, I'm going to live forever. It's chilling and it's beautiful. And of course, I've written this book called Forever, and certainly that's one of the things it means to evoke. But I'm going to end this reading of ours by reading a poem that's even more recent. It's also in 6 parts, but the parts are very short. And each of those 6 parts has a subtitle, which I'll read, of course. And the poem at large is called Now and Then. You will notice, all of you, right away that the whole of this poem is about living in School Street in the borough of Stonington. Now and then. 1. The borough. James is walking down Main Street. He's putting one foot ahead of the other. 1, 2. He's watching an egret stepping through the reeds, its body starting, then frozen, looking for fish. Why can't he walk like that? Behind the broken down wall, that's Lynn and Jeff's house. There's the bench where somebody's sitting every day, but not today. Today, the sun's too hot, or else not hot enough, the water clear enough to see minnows quivering in the grass. 2, admonition. He acknowledges the sins of the people in the wilderness, but still he's troubled by one. his pulse, his urine, his sweat, they all say nothing. Neither does he find changes in his appetite. His mind neither corrupted nor infatuated, yet his family, his closest friends, they see something imperceptible, something always present, which has established an empire inside him. Here, there are certain secrets d'état, never to be said out loud, by which he has been bound. 3. The egret. My mother fished here, my father too. Probably you couldn't have told them apart, but my mother fledged me, and then she was gone. I heard she met a terrible end. Can I say that? In the summer of '68, my father went to Newark for art supplies. Crowds of people, open hydrants, shattered plate glass. The dent below the passenger side window of the Chevy was left by a thrown brick. There it stayed until the Chevy was replaced. Of famine, love, difference of skin, I knew nothing. 4. First day. You compose yourself. Compose. From the old French, composer, to put together, to write. You're assigned a desk. Even now, I'm seated at a desk. I'm watching men fill a dumpster from an empty house. Quarantine from 40 jours. The practice of keeping ships from entering Venice for 40 days. You never speak of school. You run home for lunch. You like your egg salad on toast. You still do. But that morning, you learned about other languages. You sang a little song. Dites-moi pourquoi. 5. Why? In the beginning, people were visible powers of nature, like the stars and the moon. Neither did I believe in God. Not that we'd had a quarrel, only that his service, as it was described, seemed disagreeable. The consequence was not, as anyone might expect, that I grew selfish or disrespectful. But when affection came, it came with a passion uncontrollable, at least by me, who'd never had anything to control. 6, and finally, the limousine. Immediately after closing my eyes, I'm rambling through the borough in a big car. There's the Holy Ghost Society. And down by the water, young people, most of them wearing floppy hats, little else. I'm gliding down Main Street at 11:45 in the morning, the car stopping at a house where right now, no older than 4, maybe 5, there's little James still running, glancing behind him, also looking around. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We appreciate it.
I wish we could see you all. I wish we could go outside and there, you know, open bottles of sparkling beverages and fill glasses so they are overflowing. I feel like, what is I talking about? But we're happy to, would love to take some questions. How should we do the questions here now? Or
Michaela.
I'm here, James and Joanna. So I know I don't have any questions in the chat yet. So if anyone has any questions and wants to type them in the chat, go right ahead.
Wait.
There's some things in the chat, but not any questions.
All right.
But I know, I think you were saying, Joanna, there may have been a question that was submitted earlier that you might want to respond to. So if you want to respond to that, and then people can start typing in some questions, and then we'll also give you an opportunity to unmute and ask questions too. But maybe start with that, Joanna, and then we'll see if people get some questions
I think
in the chat.
It'd be great to have people unmute and join the room. Be lovely. So Jeff, you had asked in the stories, there are many stories that have to do with paper, with the physical material of paper. Absolutely, and thank you for noticing. There's even a story about paper making. The whole collection was really generated by a specific fear at our university that our library was not just what do they call it, deaccessioning, deaccessioning. Sorry, I need them. See, what would I do with them? Books, but like getting rid of them all. We sat in on a meeting for our university library in which they described the future library, which would be this big empty 4-story building that had nothing in it but plastic chairs and tables and lots of outlets and coffee makers. So that was what their vision of the library was. And
as if what we do is really boring.
Well, it had to do with a physical book. And of course, I get, we just moved out of a big house in Rochester. My office for 25 years was in the attic there. So I was carrying 25 years worth of paper and books down from the attic. That was hard. So I found myself more appreciative of ebooks and Kindle. I mean, I happily read on the screen, but I'm also devoted to physical books. And I love being here in this room, in this library. Just letting my eye run over these titles from Karl Marx to Mysteries of the Alphabet. How do you get from one to the other? It's great. Anyway, so I ended up writing a story about a library that has no books and what would happen if all the software supporting the ebook readers, all text, somehow had a malware in it that was programmed to go off in a certain year. So I ended up writing that story about the potential loss of all books. And then I found myself writing more stories about books that could be lost. And so then the physical paper became a very important subject for me to explore through the different stories. So.
This is Jenny Dixon.
Hey, Jenny.
Hi, how are you? It's good. It was great. Wonderful. I was interested when you referenced Elizabeth Bishop in The Village, because she wrote a poem in Halifax, or it was a short story about Halifax.
Several, actually, yeah.
And so that's what you were kind of referencing?
No, well, the story In the Village, I suppose, is about her childhood in Nova Scotia, but it's in particular about her mother's madness and the last episode of that madness, which led to her institutionalization. And she focuses beautifully on Nate the blacksmith and the ringing of his making of horseshoes. And that becomes for her a talisman, and it's a talisman of the making of art for everyone.
I guess I asked the question because the way you describe the houses, and I have a memory of it, which is much more just kind of an overall image than specific like you of reading that recently, January, I guess. Anyway, it just seemed that when you made a reference to her, it was also kind of the description of the houses. That's what made me think of a sense of the architecture that you were projecting. So that's why I wondered if that was what you were doing.
Yeah. I wasn't thinking of that in particular, but that's very appropriate.
Why did you call Elizabeth Bishop? That's why I guess.
I'm sorry.
You said there was something about a reference to Elizabeth Bishop when you, your poem.
Yeah, that's what I meant to say.
Yeah.
My poem is called In the Village, and her story is called In the Village.
Okay, so, okay.
Yeah.
So we're okay, thank you. Thank you. It was terrific, I enjoyed it. Now I'm going to Muteville. Bye-bye.
Good to see you,
Thank you, Jenny. So we have quite a few questions in the comments here. So this one's from Stuart. He says, thank you both. Lovely. Joanna, do you always know that a story is a story and not a novel? Does a tale ever start out as one thing and end up as another?
Absolutely, that's a good question. Thanks, Stuart. In fact, sometimes I need this guy to tell me what the potential is for something, and it can be hard to see. I have tried to stretch stories into novels, and it hasn't worked. And then I've taken novels that went nowhere and turned them into stories. It is a bit of trial and error process. I wish I knew beforehand. I came across recently a reference, a new reference I hadn't seen. It must be quite famous, by Henry James. He has so many metaphors describing writing. The most famous one is that house with fiction is a house with many windows. And that's always puzzled me. I recommend you all read the passage which James makes that equation, because it's paradoxical in ways. But so there's that. And then he compares in another essay, fiction, to a crucible, in which it in some ways this is a more conventional metaphor to use for fiction, that it's a kind of, or for all writing, it's a kind of cooking. You put your imagination through some process. It's like cooking, and you come up with some reduced savory sauce, is the way he describes it. But the more recently, I came across his reference describing the imaginative process of writing, that it is like diving deep into the depths and seeing these things, mysterious things down there, and not knowing what they are. And for those who join for our daily swim down at the point at 4:30, you're all welcome. The murky depths are really interesting, very mysterious. My respect for the sea keeps growing and growing. But it does feel like that's the right metaphor, that there's the there you go down, and there are these mysterious things that they're a little hard to see. They're there. What can we do with them? And that's what happens, I feel, with ideas, that I try to, do something with them, but I never know what they are, what they can do until something happens kind of unexpectedly, that a structure forms, a character suddenly vivid to me. Never can predict if that is possible. I feel after all these years, I should be better at predicting whether something's going to be a story or a novel, or how many pages, what I need to do to put it into readable shape. I feel like I don't know. I haven't learned anything over 30 years. So I'm not sure. But, all right. So there's that.
Thank you, Joanna. So next question from the chat is, how come you guys are so tuned into each other? Any competition?
Who asked that?
It's from Carla, but sometimes it's asked by someone else and we put it in the chat. So I'm not sure if it's from Carla here. It could be from someone else and she put it in the chat.
Like any competition.
They'd like to remain anonymous.
I think it's from Cynthia, but I also am curious.
If you're going to live as we have lived for at least the last 40 years in the arts, if you are a competitive person, the only thing you know for certain is that you have totally lost. There's someone so much better than you.
Wait, but that's not what it's about. There's not.
I don't feel any competition.
No,
it doesn't even obtain.
Yeah, no,
you can't be in the business of writing. If you are competitive, you won't write.
Yeah, well, a lot of people on the screener know, and Jim's poems are about this. So we did, it's no secret that there's a ongoing challenge of chronic illness in our life. So that is, I think, creating new ways of thinking about the world, and I think,
like what pandemic?
We're no, we are constantly, because of changes in our life and challenges in the world, constantly readjusting and trying to figure out what comes next and how to make the best of life. I don't know if I see Pam and David Leeming, hopefully you're hearing this, but I was struck that by something Baldwin said, and I probably don't have this right, but Americans are sincere, distinguished by their sincerity, but understand nothing. Is that right? The understanding nothing is sometimes, I feel, too strongly, that life is just so difficult. I think we both share this feeling that one of the things we are trying to understand is the position of uncertainty.
Yes.
By working in the fields of imaginative writing, we're not dealing with verifiable information. So we have to be constantly trying to figure out what does it mean to live uncertainly. And so there is just constant readjustment and discoveries, and then rediscoveries and revisions.
I said this to our friend Stuart just the other day. There's a wonderful essay by the British psychiatrist Adam Phillips called Contingency for Beginners. And he never says it, but as you read it, you realize, what else could contingency be for? You can't be an expert at it, ever. And it's a little like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Cynthia Elliott said that question was from her.
Cynthia. Ask Doug.
We have another question in the chat from Ruth. She says, how long do you find yourself returning to a piece of writing before you consider it finished?
Forever? What did you say?
I guess for me, there's something that happens. When I start to undo a lot of the corrections I've made, that's a sign that I'm ready to move on. Is it ever finished?
The great French poet Paul Valéry said poems are never finished. They are only abandoned. And it's, that's a little scary, but it's something like that. You get tired of it.